Well, so I'm going to talk about collaborating online. So a practical guide for working online with hybrid teams, focusing on addressing problems and practices for specifically hybrid and remote first teams. It's sort of there's unique problems that you have when you're remote first as opposed to being distributed. Sort of the default is that everybody's in a separate location. So you have different problems and some benefits to that. So focusing particularly on hybrid teams because that's what we are, that's what I know best. So about myself, co-founder of Grain, and I lead the product engineering teams. I was on my previous job, I was the first engineer at branch.io, deep linking company that provides linking infrastructure for mobile apps. And I was there for about 4 years. About Grain, went over some of this, 12 team members, 5 San Francisco, 7 remote. And our mission at Grain is to make voice and video conversations more accessible and useful. Great. So when we're talking about online collaboration and communication, there's a concept called a complex system. And a complex system is a system which large networks of components with no central control and simple rules of operation give rise to complex collective behavior, sophisticated information processing, and action learning or evolution. And in my opinion, a company is a complex system. It's a large network of components, and depending, you can have, there is no technical center of control since everybody's their own individual. And what you're really optimizing for is your rules of operation and managing the information processing. And if you do it right, depending on how you structure your information and how you structure your team, you can have actual network effects within a team, right? Given that a team is a network, if you are managing your information correctly, you can have network effects. So I'm going to talk mostly about just the simple rules of operation that we follow. It's mostly, rather than advice, it's just kind of how we do things. So the first rule of operation that we have at Grain is default to open. As we've been building a product, we've in the past and currently, especially how and whether you default to open or default to close makes a big difference. And so we choose to default to open. And one of the big reasons is we care a lot about transparency. And the benefits of transparency is that you can have information symmetry across your organization, thus that you have people can make better decisions and thus create a better product, serve your customers better, make a bigger impact, right? Otherwise, you have information silos, and things get missed. You have inefficiencies, etc. So the more open you can be, the more efficient you can be if you do it right. One side effect of defaulting to open is that you show and build and foster trust within the organization. We're a big proponent of trust. It's our core value. So we build and foster trust within the organization. And I believe that it starts with the employer. The employer and the team and the leaders show trust to the team members from the onset, and thus it is grows within the team and in both directions. One of the side effects of defaulting to open is that you have an information overload. And so before that, I want to talk kind of about 2 different types of systems. You have a point-to-point system and hub and spoke system. For the last 100 years, most teams have operated as a hub and spoke system where you have one leader, one manager controlling information flow. And this ends up being a abnormal amount of power for this G node, right? And they are incentivized to control that information because of the power that comes along with that, right?
So hub and spoke system is a regular system like
build a point-to-point
top-down.
Top-down, manager reports, everything flows through a manager. Manager is the one making decisions, interfacing with other teams. A more transparent, flat organization is a point-to-point system where F talks to B and D talks to G, right?
Right.
This is a separate conversation, but I believe that the role of G is to facilitate this. That's the role of the manager, right? And so that's what we try to build, is that F talks to B, A talks to C, and we do that by having an open and transparent workspace. So some of those practices are, we have Slack channels that are open by default. We are pretty aggressive about having creating new channels and also archiving them. So channels are not just team-based, they'll be idea-based, project-based, et cetera, in Slack. And that can help facilitate this, because the other part of this problem, right, if you have a point-to-point system or information symmetry, is that you have information overload. And so it's really harder, it's harder to find a signal from the noise. And that's what we think a lot about that, both in our product and just generally within teams. And so we're really working hard to solve that when it comes to voice communication. And so that's why we have another simple rule and principle of push versus pull. So really important to understand when and where to use a push or pull method. So a push method would be saying, let's use Slack, for example, would be tagging a person in Slack or sending a DM, right? You're pushing something somewhere or tagging at channel or information coming to you, right? A pull method would be that channel that you might not even be a member of, but you know that is available to you. So say, I'm now working on that project, or I now have some ideas, I might go contribute to that space, right? And so to create a efficient pull system, the method of you have to make sure that you're categorizing and putting information in the correct places. This is also why we're big proponents of Notion. It's also defaults to open. So there's, every time we create a page, it's accessible to everybody in the workspace, as long as it's in the team workspace. And that's really changed the way we work. And so,
sure, but it works in a small team. But if you have 1,000 employees and all the pages will be open, it would be completely a mess. So I can share my personal experience. Like we use Notion as a wiki tool, and there are like 7 people here, just 7. And if you go to Notion and see all the pages and you just try to understand what person is working on, it's super difficult to figure out. And I
are you talking
used
from like
to manage
project management?
Yeah, and I used to manage company with 100 employees. And as a manager in an old styled organization, I don't need to know everything about 100 employees because it's quite a lot of information. So, and you are saying that you are publishing the pages, which is completely open to everyone in the team. Should it be open as well in a big organization?
That's a good question. Yeah. So again, it comes back to categorization. It's very important that things stay categorized and organized and scoped within certain verticals, right? It seems like that's more of the problem we're trying to solve, rather than like what is this information, and the better categorized that information is, the less of a problem that is, right? And that's exactly why we have a pull method, right? Is if it's categorized and organized correctly, then I don't have to know what's going on in the marketing folder, right? Or the marketing, and I know that it will to me if I did want to work on it, or say they need my help on something. That it's much easier for me to jump into that at that point in time. For example, like if we did decide that marketing conversation was a private channel, you can't turn that public. That's one of the principles in Slack, is that private channels can't be turned public. So by defaulting to open, you give the opportunity for that information to be accessed via a pull method, right? So when I need that information to do my job better, then I can access it. And that's kind of our litmus test, right? Is for transparency is the fact that I have access to the job, will it help me do my job better, right? And so again, it comes back to scoping as opposed to access, right? And one thing we've done is again, I think approaching Notion, particularly in you mentioned, right? It's a long form location for of capture, right? We found that their product management tools and a lot of those other kind of components that they have not to scale very well. For project management, we actually use Linear. Highly recommend it. Great. And so again, yeah, you're really balancing accessibility and notification. Something we're working on currently right now is being explicit around kind of expectations around notifications. Sometimes I'll send a message at 11 p.m. my time, might be 4 a.m. somebody else's time, or it might be 9 p.m. right? Even easier to feel like I need to respond, but being explicit around expectations around notifications is important. Great. One other principle we have around communication is that we always turn the camera on. Sometimes if the video quality is not as great, we turn it off, default allows team members to be more present, and also it's a higher fidelity conversation than just voice because there's more data available. For example, I have one team member that talks with his face a lot. What I mean by that is that he will express the way he feels about something via expressions on his face that I would not actually be able to capture if I just heard his voice, right? It'd only be that audible sound. And so you can gauge a lot of more information and thus kind of make better decisions around the conversation you're having. Record most of the things, not all the things. We found that if there are certain conversations that are better left unrecorded because of information sensitivity, frankly, most of those are just one-on-ones. We found that it feels much more comfortable to have a one-on-one external conversation. As long as we have consent from the other party, we record it. The benefit of that is that, and this is what we think about all the time, is the value of recording conversations. Is the vast majority of those conversations are not going to be useful to access later. Looks like we got a chat, Matt. Jake still lags. Shoot, sorry all. Here, why don't I
Now I don't hear you at all.
Maybe turning off the video will help.
All right, let's turn off my video. Am I lagging?
Yeah.
Huh. Oh well. I mean, there's not really much I can do. I can. How about now? Still lagging?
Better?
Better?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Unfortunate. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Let's check. Yeah, we're solid here. Funky. Okay. Well, I guess we'll just continue. Sound good?
Yeah, it sounds good now, but share your screen and I believe turn on the video, because when it's difficult to understand the data without your video, as you mentioned before.
Yeah, exactly, right? Cool. Yeah, there's a lot of information. There's like this really bogus concept called like a 7% rule, like that only 7% of your information is being conducted over your voice, but it's not even like it's been debunked and isn't even a real study. But it is true that there's a bunch of information being conducted, not only over like the way we're expressing ourselves, but also the information being conveyed on the screen, right? I might not cover and also like how would you be able to see all these pictures of dogs, and like that's probably the best part. So anyways, Great. So we think a lot about nonlinear communication and being an effective or an organization that is effective in its mode of having conversations, right? Meetings in general. And you can only, and this is really the motivation for why I started Grain, was that there was, we really value transparency as an organization, and we try to push as much to Slack. The board presentation was accessible to the team, financials, all hands where you could ask any question you wanted. We try to push as much information to public Slack channels as possible. But then there was this other medium, right, of communication, which was voice meetings. And I found that a lot of the information in those meetings was necessary or vital for other people to do their jobs, but they weren't invited to them. I also found that people were attending these meetings and they only needed 5% of the conversation, right? And so that's really what we're working on, is trying to optimize that that medium of voice and video communication, and making it accessible and useful. So if you record, you don't have to always be in the meeting, right? You can, that meeting can be compressed, synthesized, and maybe 10 meetings can be synthesized into a couple key points, and you can still have access to that again, that 5% of 10 meetings together. Great. Also, there's just the physical nature that not everybody can always be on the call, right? So there's a global team, somebody in, what was it? Is it 2 a.m. in China or something like that? We're not always at 2 a.m. on a conference, right? So, but there might have been that vital conversation at, this is particularly important with companies that have headquarters or offices, right? Where there's a critical mass and other people aren't there. They're not privy to the conversation that might be super important. So we try to overcompensate here. This kind of leads me to like a couple other points. One is very small, but make room to socialize. This is really important if you have a hybrid team, or really a distributed team in general, is that we can socialize over Slack, but it's not quite the same as being able to, the joke doesn't land the same, etc. So what we actually try to do is we try to preserve a few minutes at the beginning. We actually do stand-ups every day. It's as much to like see each other and interact with each other as it is to get updates. And so we will make times like ask how the weekend went, chit chat, just make that it feels a little more relaxed, because that's really the only time that I can count on being able to see somebody, right? And so I recommend this particularly for remote teams is at the beginning of the time, make room for people to socialize, but particularly the remote folks, ask them questions so they can feel comfortable. And so that means, not being a Swiss clock, not starting and stopping exactly at the right time. Great. And then the next principle is the onus is on HQ. The onus is on HQ to create an environment where remote employees can collaborate effectively. And so this is kind of very practical stuff, but a lot of it hinges on the setup at your office, making sure that you have a high quality camera that's hooked up to a computer where it can see the entire room. We like Zoom do this, but they're hella expensive. So we actually just have a Mac Mini connected to a computer. And I think I have a picture of that on the next room. Cool. Yeah. So we have our little Mac Mini right here. We have our video camera wide angle lens that can capture the whole room and accept the spot. And so it's important. And we try to encourage people to not sit there so that everybody can see each other's faces and level the playing field. We have a whiteboard, and we have a microphone connected via USB right in the center of the room. This is really, really, really important. It's probably just as important, if not more important, than the video camera, is that you get clear reception, and the fact that the Mac Mini has a crappy mic behind here just doesn't cut it. Even the microphones on the cameras aren't as good. Very much encourage people to get a microphone, put it in the middle of the room. We drilled a hole in the middle of this table to make that work. We also have something fun here. We have a second camera that points at the whiteboard. Zoom actually has a share. Zoom, go to share it, go to advanced, and you can share a second camera. And so this camera has got an extension cord into the Mac Mini pointed directly at the video. And so this is where I talk about, like, it is really very important that, like, you are considerate of the people that aren't in the room. And so things we do when we're working remote is we try to make sure this is like a fresh black pen, and that, like, and we're sharing this screen so people, if we do have to whiteboard, because that is probably the hardest thing to facilitate and kind of bridge that gap between remote and physical is whiteboarding. The whiteboard tools just aren't quite the same, particularly when you're trying to draw diagrams and work effectively. One side note is we use Miro.com for retrospectives, and that's been really awesome. It's pretty interesting. You have another medium for I would almost say it's actually more effective than your traditional sticky notes on a whiteboard. Everybody's getting away. There's not one person at the center of the whiteboard. So yeah, those are basic principles. And then the last principle I have is to get offline. One of the best tools to improve online collaboration is to meet face-to-face. There's something special that happens when you meet kind of in the physical world. You realize that person on the other side is actually, you know, a collection of atoms. They're a real person. Some surprising things is, like, when you meet somebody for the first time, it's like you realize they're, like, the difference in their height, which isn't always indicative via, like, collaborating on video conferencing. So that's always a fun thing. But I found it to make worlds of difference for myself, for our team members, is when they get here and they meet people. We spend most of that time just working and together, and also doing activities and socializing kind of on the outside, but we don't optimize for, like, any sort of in-person work. We found that really work together in a physical space, get to know that person, facilitate that information. And then one thing that really helped was validating for me in the way we've been conducting and building this remote team is that one of our team members from Mexico came up and he said that being in the office doesn't feel that different than working remotely. And so he gets to know the people, loves coming up here, but because we try to push as much to Slack, try to keep it as open as possible, when we have the conversations, we try to record them as much as possible and make those accessible. He feels more here, right? So that's really all I have for today. Really appreciate it. If you're interested in kind of talking about this subject, I'm happy to also kind of distribute my email. You can also find me on Twitter, Jake C. Adams.
Some funny comment to you from Kate. I think Jake likes dogs, definitely. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Do you like dogs?
Who doesn't? That's what I was thinking when I started with these, doing different pictures. And then I'm like, well, everybody loves dogs. Just kidding, not everybody, but it's a pretty safe bet to put a dog picture in a presentation.